Welcome to this webinar on wind energy history and records. My name is Kolya Abramsky. I'm an archivist and records management consultant based in the UK, and I'm now a special advisor on archives to the World Wind Energy Association. First of all, I'd like to apologize on behalf of Stefan Gazanger, the Secretary General, who is unable to attend due to unforeseen circumstances. So this webinar, which the WWEA has organized together with the Mills Archive in the UK, seeks to open what we see as an important ongoing global discussion process with a view to taking concrete actions around archiving the world wind energy sector. So I'd like to welcome you and thank you all for coming and look forward to your valuable contributions today. The speakers in this meeting come from 10 countries and all continents. All the speakers are very senior and experienced within the wind sector in their countries and internationally. You are what I would like to respectfully call veterans in the field. You have wide knowledge of the history of the sector, and in many ways, together, you make up an important part of the collective memory of the global wind energy sector. I'd like to now hand over to the Honorable Peter Ray, AO, President of the World Wind Energy Association, who will formally welcome you all and open the meeting. And after that, I will say a few more words about the reason for organizing this meeting and introduce the other speakers.
I don't think Peter Ray's here at the moment.
I think he might have fallen off again.
Yeah.
Peter, are you there? He was on before, but I couldn't hear him. Okay. Well, I would say I'll continue and we'll try and get him back. So basically, this meeting comes as the outcome of about a year of discussion between the World Wind Energy Association, the Mills Archive, and myself. During this period, we've begun gathering information about wind energy archives and thinking through the challenges of archiving the global wind energy sector. We've recently co-authored an article on the topic for the Journal of the International Council on Archives, which will come out later in the new year, probably about April. So today we're here to share information about the history of the wind sector in different countries, with a view to thinking about archiving in the global wind energy sector. The discussions today are intended as an initial meeting in what we hope will be an ongoing process. And while the focus of today's meeting is on the history of the wind energy sector, it is intended as a way into a discussion on archives and records of the wind sector, as without preserving the archives of the sector and making them accessible to future generations, the history of the sector will be lost. Archives are the historical records of past activities carried out by organizations, individuals, governments, corporations, non-governmental organizations, and many other types of actors. While archives are the products of past activity, archiving is fundamentally about the future. It is about identifying, preserving, and making accessible records for future generations. As such, archiving protects the past and the evidence and memory of the past for future generations to learn about, reflect on, and evaluate. It is of fundamental importance for the future success and the future strategies of the wind sector to understand the history of the modern sector's development. Importantly, the global wind energy sector is, as everyone knows, will be an important industrial part of the transition away from fossil fuels, essential in addressing climate change. And this transition process will still take many years to develop and is likely to be very difficult, with many advances and setbacks occurring at different times and different places. In order to evaluate progress along the way and develop strategies, tactics, and programs of intervention, it will be essential to preserve, access, and interpret the historical records of the sector. It is probable that, with hindsight, the transition away from fossil fuels and in part towards wind energy will prove to be one of the most historically significant transition processes in many centuries. Therefore, it will be vital that historical records exist in the future in order to understand this process. Archives include both paper records, audio and video cassettes, electronic records, and other media. The development of the global wind energy sector has massively expanded in scale and geographical reach over the last 40 years. Importantly, this period closely coincides with the global shift from paper to digital records. Crucially, the preservation and making accessible of records does not happen automatically, but needs deliberate and planned interventions. The global wind energy sector is rapidly expanding. However, the archiving of the sector, especially its recent significant expansion, has not yet been undertaken on a significant scale or in any systematic way. The task is urgent, as many of the pioneering actors, individuals, companies, research centers, wind parks, and other infrastructure projects may no longer be active. Individuals may have retired or died. Institutional and organizational actors may have ceased to exist. An important initial task involves mapping what kind of records and archival and records management interventions exist. What is the geographical locations, and which categories of actors possess records, and which specifically named actors does this include? Also, what are the key risks that threaten these records? So this is the context in which we're having this webinar. Just like to check if Peter is back on. Peter? No, Peter doesn't seem to be on.
May I just interrupt you? I got a message from Peter. He has some connection problems, so I advised him to log out and try to log in again. So let's hope he will appear soon.
Okay, so then I think the best is that I will introduce the next speakers. So many of you are people who I've had some contact with before. Others are people who I have not met before, but I'd like to welcome you all into this webinar. I've attended 2 World Wind Energy conferences myself, in New Delhi in 2006 and in Havana in 2013. And I'm aware of the important contribution the organization has made and continues to make in the development of wind energy globally. So the speakers have been asked to highlight the first steps, organizations, and actors which started wind power development and deployment in their countries, and what the situation is with regard to the preservation and access of archives and records relating to these histories. Our time schedule is quite tight, as we have a number of speakers, so people are asked to speak for about 10 minutes each. The speakers are as follows. We will have Liz Bertram, who's from the director of the Mills Archive Trust in the UK and is a co-organizer of this meeting. I will move Jana to second, as you've said you have to leave earlier. So we'll have Jana Kruse from the Nordic Folkecenter of Renewable Energy in Denmark. Peter Rye from the World Wind Energy Association and Australian Wind Energy Association, if he can reconnect. Guiyong from the Chinese Wind Energy Association, and Dr. Jami Hossain from the World Wind Energy Association and the Indian Wind Energy Association. After that, we will have a 10-minute break, and then Professor Dr. Galal Osman from the Egyptian Wind Energy Association will speak, and then Galyna Shmidt from the Ukrainian Wind Energy Association, and then Arne Jäger from a museum in Germany, the Deutsches Windkraftmuseum. Then Dr. Everaldo Feitosa from Eolica in Brazil, and Paul Gipe, who will join later because he's in California, where it's early in the morning now. So those are the speakers. After that, we will have a more sort of informal discussion of what we see as some of the ways forward, and the question of what are the important tasks in the archiving sector. So with that, I will pass over to Liz.
Thank you very much, Collier. Hello. Right, I'm going to just see if I can share my screen with you. Right, can you all see that? Hopefully you can. Right, so I'm going to try my best to keep within 10 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an introduction to the Mills Archive Trust, which is where I work, and then move on to some of who I feel are the key players, if you like, in some of the history, some of the recent history of electricity generation in the UK, at least, where we have some records about them in our archive. So, yeah, so I'll do those things. And then I've got a slide where I suggest some areas for us to consider archiving, but it might be that we talk more about that a bit later. We'll sort of see how that goes. So the Mills Archive Trust, so we're based in the UK. We protect, preserve and promote the history of milling around the world. and we make the information freely available to people around the world as well. By milling history, I mean mills that have been used to to produce different types of food, so flour, but also sugar, for instance, different types of textile production, all manner of industries really, and we cover all time periods as well. Having said that, most of what we have probably is the UK and then Europe and then the rest of the world, but we're very interested in expanding our international holdings as well. And the whole reason that we do it, the whole reason that we exist, is because we want to help people to see how important that milling history is, and not just the industry in a sort of anonymous sense, but also looking at key individuals who've been involved. And so by extension, we're keen to promote the history of electricity generation as well. We're completely independent. We are a charity. We've been around for 20 years. We were originally led by volunteers. We now have 4 members of staff, myself included. And we've probably got about 3 million records. And by records, I mean things like photographs, correspondence, technical drawings, artworks, and those pictures on the right are just to give you a bit of a feel for the sorts of things I'm talking about. We do also have a library. So we have lots of books and journals relating to milling, and we've got about 5,000 of those. And we're open every day, and people can access a lot of our material over the internet. And we've actually invested a lot of money in making things available online. So we have about 80,000 records which are visible online. So you can see them, either see some basic information, or you can see actual copies of photographs, for example. We also have a website which provides a sort of user-friendly gateway into what we have in the collections. And we have a lively e-newsletter program as well. We send out newsletters every week about all sorts of things to do with milling. So we have a board of trustees who oversee what we do. And one of the nice things about the trust is, because we're a charity, we're very dependent on volunteers. So they come in and they help us, and they represent a huge range of ages and backgrounds, and we provide work experience as well. We are what is called an accredited archive service. So in the UK, the National Archives runs a programme of accreditation where you have to demonstrate that you meet certain standards, and we hold that title and have done since 2016. I've got a couple of slides now just to show you a little bit of the sort of material that we have, just to give you a general feel. So, as I've said, lots of paper documents, but we do also have some artifacts as well, some objects. As I said, we're interested in the structures, the mills themselves, the technology, but also the stories around the people and the families and the workforce as well. In our library, I counted, we have on the shelves about, I think at least 25 different languages represented in our holdings. I remember Kolya came to visit, whenever that was, a couple of months ago, and you were quite impressed by the by the wealth of languages. And that's come about from people giving us the material. We don't buy things. These are all donated books and records that we're given. We do a lot of outreach, so we go out and we spread the word. We have exhibitions on site. We go to other events externally, and we have been open in the past and had children coming through the doors, which is quite unusual for an archive and very entertaining. So I'm just going to cover briefly what we do already have on electricity generation where it relates to wind. So in terms of our archive, our main collection is something called the Edward Lancaster Burn collection. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a moment, but we have very large plans that we've had to have conserved. We've got photographs, notes as well. And he was sort of mainly working in, say, the 1920s, 1930s. Other than that, we do have quite a few photographs of different types of wind turbine from the 1970s. And then on the library side, so going back to the books and that sort of thing, we've got several hundred items, so books, research papers, adverts, trade literature, representing a range of countries. And we're still working through this because we've got a lot of material. So we have gone through about 2/3 of the library material and catalogued it. And what that means is we have entries for those things on our website so people can see what we have, at least for about 2/3 of the material. And that's a work in progress. That's just to give you a flavour of some of the wind energy related publications that we have that I've dug out. Right, I think I'm doing okay for time. I'm now going to try and in about 5 minutes give you a breakdown of the history of electricity generation in the UK with regards to wind. As I say, focusing on a couple of key individuals. I do have lots of other information, so I'm also happy to share. I'm happy to share these slides after the meeting anyway. Just get in touch and I will give you my email address at the end. And I do also have more information, but I've had to really be strict and cut it down. So I'm going to look at some time periods and bring us up to the present day. Just to go through this really briefly. Obviously, we see the story as starting with the traditional windmills, which we used, as I say, for things like flour production, and they appeared in England at least in the 1100s. And gradually grew in number. In terms of improving efficiency of those sorts of machines, more work was done, certainly sort of the 17 and 1800s, to sort of improve efficiency. But there is a theory that, you know, in those days, because there were fewer competing power sources, there wasn't perhaps so much of a need to sort of refine the technology. So that's one theory. And then moving on to who we call the pioneer outliers. So these were some of the first people who were central to developing electricity generation using the wind. And so one person we found is Professor James Blythe. He was Scottish. He was an engineer and academic. And he is credited now with building the first wind turbine to power the lights in his holiday home in Scotland. Apparently, so this is 1877. That was previously thought to have been achieved by Charles Brush, who was in the States, but I think they were very close together in their inventions. But apparently, James Blythe beat him to it just. And he experimented with his design. There were some flaws in his design, and you can see that image in the top right. Apparently, which I think looks quite futuristic actually for 1877. So moving on to the next person, Lancaster Burn. So he was mainly active, as I say, sort of 1920s, 1930s, certainly between the First and Second World War. He was the first president of the Newcomen Society, which is an international society that promotes the history of engineering. And he actually authored 3 patents relating to wind technology. And this picture I love because this is a large drawing. This is a really large technical drawing, which we have had conserved. And that's actually the clean version. So it used to look a lot worse than that. And quite nicely, the booklet that you can see in the top right of the picture, that is also in our collection, and it includes an illustration of this drawing, which we have the original of. So it's also quite nice to see when different bits of when different records sort of fill in the gaps, if you like. And his daughter has a really lovely story about her memories of growing up. He built, this is Lancaster Burn, he built this little windmill, literally, on his roof, and that generated electricity. And I think it's so easy sometimes to take for granted the magic of the electricity and being able to bring that into people's houses. And she wrote an account about that, which I think is really nice. Right, moving on to Edward William Golding, working mainly in the 1950s. A very important book called The Generation of Electricity by Wind Power. And he was looking at the history as he saw it within recent years, particularly the post the Second World War. I'm going to skip that, sorry, because I haven't got much time. Then moving on to 1970s onwards, you know, certainly in terms of the UK, and I know further afield as well, were various issues taking place, which were then influencing the reuptake of electricity generation using the wind. And in the UK, in the 1990s, there was privatization of that, which meant that we could develop more, you know, different companies and new wind farms. And someone else in the UK who was very significant, who I've had the privilege of speaking to, is Peter Musgrove. So he established the British Wind Energy Association. And before that, he, and even afterwards, he was championing the development of wind power at a time when it wasn't popular. And he still remains very much involved, closely follows what's happening. He is a big advocate for offshore wind and development of larger offshore solutions. And it was his company, well, his team, sorry, that were involved in the completion of the UK's first wind farm in 2003. And recently he's agreed to give us his collection, which is obviously very exciting. We will look after that for the future. This was my slide, Collier, about possibly different areas. Should we come back to this later?
Well, why not introduce it now, and then we
Yeah.
can turn it into some discussion points later. I think
Yeah.
that will be,
Okay.
work
So,
well.
so the reason I've suggested these areas is we've used these for a different sector. So we were also looking at what we call the modern milling industry, so flour production. And so one way we've approached that is with these different themes. And like I said, it's trying to get across that we're interested in lots of different aspects of the sector. That can be, including failures. You know, I think that's very important to preserve that information for future generations, you know, where people have tested things out and maybe they haven't worked. Obviously having a global approach to this, because this is very global. And interestingly, it kind of always has been, it seems to me, to an extent, looking at key individuals, but then also wider workforce achievements and developments as well. So these were just some of my thoughts, and maybe we can come back to some of these themes. And I'm sure, you know, you've all got your own views as well on what is particularly significant. So it'd be good to hear about those areas from you later as well. My final slide, we're pleased to know. Yeah, please get in touch. That's my email address. As I said, I'm happy to send out these slides or the extended version. Yeah, any questions, get in touch, but we'll also talk during this session, and Merry Christmas when it arrives. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, for that very sort of thorough introduction to the situation in Britain, both in terms of the history of the wind sector, but also the initiatives to actually preserve that history. So I see now that Peter is hopefully connected. Peter, are you there?
Can you hear me? I can.
Yes,
I'm having trouble. Right. Well, I can't get the visual, but I apparently have got the voice part of it. So
Okay.
belatedly, can I say on behalf of WWEA, thank you very much, everybody, for participation. If I now go ahead with an abbreviated version of what I was going to say, so that we catch up a little bit of time, that I'm sorry I've caused delay.
No problem.
The situation, so far as Australia is concerned, I'll try to deal with fairly briefly, but then send a letter with some more, an email with some more details. But as we've just been seeing, wind has been used for windmill purposes for a very long time. And in Australia, windmills were very common in the rural areas, particularly for areas which had limited surface water supply and limited rainfall. And bores were used to get underground water access, and then the windmill would draw it up. And they were quite common, and we can get some information in relation to that. The start of the wind energy in Australia was probably a 150 kilowatt turbine that was near Brimley in Victoria, or it could have been one near Tura, which was certainly operating in the early 90s, but there wasn't very much going until the 1990s. And then the company of which I was chairman, Hydro Tasmania, was a major hydro and the main contributor of renewable energy up until the time when solar and wind developed. And we started on wind in the middle of the 1990s. Tasmania has a weather pattern which enables it to be a very good place for wind generation, because if you look west from the west coast of Tasmania, the next land around the world is South America. So it's a long way round to for the wind to develop, and the systems, the Roaring 40 systems, bring very good wind to the west coast in particular. And so we set up a trial on an island which is partway between Tasmania and the mainland of Australia. And that was 3.75 megawatt machines, which were fairly soon added to by what in those days was regarded as fairly large, a couple of 1.5 megawatt machines. And that is one of the early developments of wind in Australia, and the records in relation to that are all available. I've got a large number of them, but also the Hydro Tasmania has records which can be made available for a lot of the work. There was the next development, the major development, was the upgrading of renewable energy conferences, which took place in the middle to latter part of the 1990s. And that saw at first mainly solar for outback areas, and then the development of wind. And there was an Australian Wind Energy Association, which was formed in that era. And also in December 1999, the Renewable Generators of Australia was formed to get solar, wind, hydro in particular together in developing renewable energy as a program for Australia. And this followed on from the Kyoto meeting, which had stimulated at a government level with the then federal minister, Robert Hill, being very supportive, and the introduction of what was called the Mandated Renewable Energy Target Scheme, which provided a stimulus for the development of wind energy, amongst others. Australian Greenhouse Office was established by the federal government as well, and there was the awakening, I suppose you could say, of things happening. Then there was a period shortly after that when the opposition to the development of renewable energy was highlighted by particular objections. And there were two forms of objections. One which came from the fossil fuel industry and influenced the federal government of the day. State governments varied in their attitude at that time, but information in relation to what they did will be able to be made available. Then we found that while wind was getting going quite well, and for instance, the first manufacturing, as far as I know, in Australia was in Tasmania, where we managed to get Vestas to agree that as part of supplying for our first wind farms, they would start to manufacture in Tasmania. It was an assembly basis with some of the parts being produced in Tasmania. Certainly the towers were and still are being. That was lasted for 2 years until the mandated renewable energy target scheme was cancelled by the federal government, toned down to be virtually cancelled by the federal government. Shortly afterwards, the Australian Greenhouse Office, which had done an excellent job and was a world-leading approach, was reduced and then ultimately eliminated. About that time, not only was there the Australian Wind Energy Association, but also developed was an organisation known as REGA, Renewable Energy Generators of Australia. And in 1999, that was formed to bring together all of the emerging renewable energy and to try to get a voice which could be presented to the public and in particular to the governments, both federal and state. The pattern from then was influenced by opposition, and the opposition came from people who claimed that health was adversely affected by people who lived close to a wind farm. And there was also opposition to noise, and there was also opposition, which I don't think was much more than people who lived near a wind farm but didn't have the income from having some of the turbines on their land, and so they objected. So you had a sort of aggregate of objection, and there's lots of information about that. It was highlighted by some training which was given to people by the Heartland Institute of the United States, which has opposed wind farming very vigorously over the years. And there were hearings of various sorts in courts and Senate inquiry. The Senate in the Australian Federal Parliament had 2 or 3 inquiries. Eventually, by about 2015-16, we had the appointment of a National Wind Farm Commissioner who was able to start to sort out some of the nonsense that was going on and to introduce some then needed sustainable development guidelines, which the company of which I was chair, Hydro Tasmania, had developed for the WWEA in 2005, and they would have still been carried through. They're still in existence. That applied to a general approach to sustainable development, but this was much more clearly developed as a result of the objections and the development gradually of the system which we now have, which is partly governed by state governments and partly by the federal government. I think I could summarize by saying that since about the middle of the era between 2010 and 2020, we've seen a stop-start approach because of different government attitudes. Some states were very strong in encouraging the wind farm development, and there's material in relation to their policies, which is again available for recording in this whole project. The programs which federal government started included one called ARENA, which is a clean energy finance arrangement for $10 billion, which was to go towards encouraging, assisting in the development. There was the clean energy technology innovation. There was the development, as I've mentioned, of manufacturing. There was then the aspect of social license development in the it's still continuing. It went from being objectors in the way of health to objectors from a point of view of other aspects of the environment. And those objections are still quite common. And there is a need to be able to make those a little more realistic, and I think that's what's probably developing in Australia at the moment. There are various appeals from one government agency to another, which are all able to be recorded and have imposed restrictions on the rate of development. However, we have in the past several years seen a very large, very rapid increase in the development of wind in Australia. It has been able to go ahead because investment came with or without government attraction. And there's now a very large amount of investment taking place in Australia. There's a huge number of new wind farms being developed and new wind farms being developed, both onshore and offshore. And again, the records in relation to that are reasonably readily available. The Wind Farm Commissioner and the other state and federal organisations all have records which can be accessed and which show a large part of the action that was taking place over this period between the middle of the 1990s and today. We've now got to the stage where offshore is developing quite rapidly from a point of view of applications and approvals. There's one announced today for quite a large one in Bass Strait. There's another one which is being developed in Bass Strait. And again, the documentation is available for that. What we've seen is that in very recent time, international investment flows are strong and will push hard the rate of wind development. And with a change of government in Canberra, as well as some very enthusiastic governments in Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania, we have every indication that wind farm development will proceed at a very rapid pace. There are the other renewable energy technologies which are also developing, but solar at 12%, hydro at 6%, and wind at 10% are some of the figures which add up to about 30% of total generation was last year from renewable energy. There's been some development of biomass, but that's mainly consistent with the traditionally using sugarcane remnants, and I don't think it works in synergy with wind in the way that solar does. And then finally, there is the proposal for a link between Tasmania and Victoria, which would enable pumped storage to support the intermittent solar and wind energy being developed in Victoria. And there's a cable called Marinus Link, which is proposed, and there's a lot of information available for that. It's had, I don't know how many hearings, but almost everything in the development of the wind story in Australia is subject to hearings of which there are records. I think, unfortunately, I can say there's probably too much. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get the screen to be able to talk directly to you. I had a map up behind me which showed where all the development is taking place, and that is primarily on the coastal areas of Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania, and then quite a bit up in the various areas of New South Wales and Queensland, but the southern states are where the wind is better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. I think you really showed the sort of complexity of the sector as made up of many different actors, many different relationships, many different fields, you know, whether it's political, legislative, or financial, or industrial, obviously. And also you show that it's a conflictive process where there have been improvements in the past, setbacks, and that it's an ongoing process. It's an unfinished history. So I think that sort of, you know, really hits the whole question of archiving. You know, how are these relationships and processes of change documented over time? and all the different actors, you know, who controls the different records, what they choose to do with them, what they choose not to do with them, etc. Raises very interesting questions. I'd like to just go to, I mean, we're doing it, originally the order of speakers was in terms of time difference. So I'm aware it's very late in China and India. So if we could do you first, and then Jami, and then we'll return to Yana before the break, so that she can leave in time. So now you from the Chinese Wind Energy Association.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very pleased to attend this webinar. And first, I'd like to share my slides. Yeah, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes to share what we have, the situation in China. And about the Chinese wind histories, about 40 years. We start the industry about at the very early stage of 1980s. And at the first stage, prior to 1985, there's much of them the off-grid turbines, and on the very small scale grid-connected turbines technologies. And the second stage is from the 1980s to 1990s. Within these 10 years, there's a lot of promotions and demo and the research has conducted. And I should say during the whole process, we very appreciate the help and the assistance from the European countries, including Denmark, UK, Holland, and other countries, and Germany. So about this stage, the first wind farm was installed in Shandong province in China in 1986. So that's quite milestones. The third stage we call the scaled development. That means from the end of 1990s to 2005. 2005 is a very important year in the Chinese wind history, because at this year, the Chinese government has issued and launched the renewable energy law and other supporting policies. So from the very beginning of 2006, so we see a very fast development. We call it large-scale development in Chinese wind history. And within the 15 years, we became the biggest market and the biggest manufacturing capacity in the world. So we divided the Chinese development course of wind power into 4 stages. And also we value the policy structures very much, because the Chinese wind power development has sponsored and supported mainly by the policies from different stages. So we can see from every year, there's a different and much clearer and more important policies issued from the Chinese government and AEA, the Chinese agencies, the government agencies. And we also see the very big progress and the improvement of technologies and the market scale. So at the end of last year, we have 300 gigawatt scale. And from every milestones, there's a big or important policies issued. So I think that's the basic policies. But among all the regulatory policies and systems, we value the price systems, because the tariff systems or tariff policy very much, because that's the most important thing for the development of Chinese wind power. And also we could collect the materials and records from the industry perspectives, because so far we have a relatively complete wind power industry chains and supply chains. including OEMs, key components, construction installations, certification services, and other technical services, and also financial institutions and insurance institutions. So for collecting or keeping the records of today, that's really challenging and really a big job for us, because they so huge over the amount. But anyway, we have more improved technologies. We have more software and the ways to record and store the materials today. And that's what we have. And so far, I think from the perspectives we could highlight in Chinese history, the first one is the Chinese Renewable Energy Law. And the second one is, as just now I mentioned, that the feed-in tariff and other regulatory systems and the milestones related with the two policy systems. And also, I think we should more highlight that's how we maintain a stable and a skilled domestic market. I think that we have a lot of success, and as well as we have a lot of failures. We have a lot of lessons learned during the whole process. But anyway, we have maintained a skilled and a big market. So I think the materials from this perspective is huge. And also we could collect materials from the completed industry chains. We use 15 years to complete the industry chain and the supply chains and to improve the technologies. And the technology drives the cost reduction drastically. So there are a lot of interesting and stimulating stories happening in China every day during the wind sector. So I think there's much more materials will happen from these perspectives. And also we have very slow internationalization process. That's quite interesting for China. We have a very huge market domestically, but we have a small international market. So that's also a lesson we should study. And from in terms of the record keeping, I think our Chinese Wind Energy Association is the main organizer for the whole industry chains. So we have much more the materials have stored. For example, like our former director, Professor Hossain, and he has a lot of materials from the 1980s. And he has also made efforts to establish a laboratory in Goldwind company. That means the OEMs in China, the biggest one. And some people also donate the materials to the laboratory, including pictures, including the documents, including the old materials. So that's very valuable for us. And also we have already recorded and stored the modern materials, especially from the 20s. And also we have published several books, and we have Wind Energy Monthly, the magazine, and started from 2005. And from this magazine, we have already interviewed the Chinese 60, almost the 60s of Chinese founding fathers, or we call the pioneers, the senior wind people in China. They make a lot of contributions to the development of Chinese wind power development. We have also interviewed, and we are going to publish a book about the people by next year. And also we are going to publish another book for the milestones history, especially about the stories happened for the companies and entrepreneurs, the company leaders, and some very important officials. They made a lot of efforts and contributions at the very beginning of Chinese history. So probably there will be, hopefully there will be 2 books published next year. And also in our association's own website, we have also started our own the materials. So I think also another way that because we have more than 500 company members, we also can collect the past and the modern materials and the records from them. And so I think we have a lot of multiple tunnels to do that. At last, also, I would like to say this is a very interesting and very meaningful proposal and activity, and we are very happy to participate if we could do anything. Thank you.
Thank you. I think also that one raises a number of different issues as well related to the question of the history. You cover the question of China first having a lot of assistance from Europe to then becoming a world leader in infrastructure, production, installed capacity, and also the whole question of the different sections of the industrial chain and the value chain, which obviously, again, is another set of actors, another set of relationships, and another set of record producers and record users in the chain. And I think another wider thing that is there is the question of how this energy shift and industrial shift is also happening in the context of a wider global economic shift of geographical centers of production. So I think all of this raises very interesting questions for archiving, and it's extremely interesting to hear the initiatives you've done. For instance, the interviews with 60 pioneers, I think is a very important initiative for preserving that history. So now I'd like to move on to Jami Hossain from the Indian Wind Energy Association. I can say myself, I was in the New Delhi conference of the World Wind Energy Association in 2006. So I had some contact myself with that. Now over to what you have to say about the history and the records.
Yeah, thank you, Kolya, and thank you, Elizabeth. It's very nice to be part of this mill archives initiative. And Kolya, as you said, you were there in 2006 in India. And at that time, we published a book, which was called The Emergence of the Wind Option. And it contains a lot of photographs and details of early wind farms. So if possible, I would like to send it across to you, maybe in a PDF form later. Yeah, so let me try to put my presentation here. Yeah, so I will give you a brief sort of a description of how wind energy has evolved in India. And the perspective is slightly from the viewpoint that we see how things have evolved and how we can learn from initiatives in the past and apply them to future as well. So there are some sort of lessons that we can learn, and there are some best practices. There are some good things, some not so good things. So we learn from all of that. So as of today, we have something like 40 gigawatt of wind capacity installed in India, and all this began sometime in 1985. So in all these years, we have been able to put up a fairly good capacity. And in fact, at that time in the early 90s, the government or the ministry at that time had the idea that the total potential for wind farms in India was around 20 gigawatt or 20,000 megawatt. But as you see, we have exceeded much more than that today. So things keep evolving, but we think now is not what is applicable in future. So my presentation, from the viewpoint of learning from the best practices and learnings from the past. We have had government policy and programs. We have also had international cooperation. So it is not just that everything is, of course, the government initiatives are very important, but the international cooperation has been there and it is still ongoing and still there with some countries, which goes on, and that also is very helpful. There is research in terms of wind resources and all different kinds of things with the wind turbines. There are issues with regard to the markets, how you open up the markets, which kind of markets. There is capacity building in different areas of different institutions, different organizations that are involved in the wind sector. And from this, we have some best practices and lessons. So this is the way it is. Typically, I would say the key elements in the Indian Wind Energy Development Program, there may be more, but I just think that, just a minute. These are some of the main elements. So first of all, there is a national wind program on wind measurements. I think this is important for any country if they are going to move forward on wind development, that they have wind measurements program. Then there is, project, how you design a project, who will buy, who will sell, and the demonstration of the technology. Then you need some institutional framework. What are the institutions which are involved in this? You need a policy and regulatory or legal framework for setting up of the projects and offtake of electricity. You need ecosystem of the industry, manufacturing, industry ecosystem. You need to assess the potential, because that's also important for the policymakers to, come out with the right kind of recommendations on the policy front, depending on how much you can potentially harness wind energy in the country. Then identification of key institutions involved, and grid management, because all of this is for us entirely grid connected. And to begin with, from the beginning, if I look at the wind energy program, which started off in 1983. In the beginning, we just looked at wind speed data that has been measured by the meteorological stations in the country. And at that time, because India is a more or less subtropical country, it was assumed that it is not a very windy country and there are not very high wind speeds in this region of the world. And so the first assessment was you take up the meteorological data. And the second was that there was an Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, which was involved in setting up the first wind measurement mass under a government program all over the country. And initially these were at 20-meter height, and they moved on to 25-meter mass. And today they are doing something like 120-meter mass. But today it's not the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, but it's this photograph that you can see on the top. You can see it's written NIWE. It's called the National Institute of Wind Energy, which was set up originally as a Center for Wind Energy Technology sometime in 1990. And it had the support of the Danish Danida. With Danida support and the RISO, initially with some support from RISO, the NIWE was set up. And now this entire program is being run by NIWE, setting up the wind measurement mass. And this activity is very important because initially, as I said, there was very little information about wind energy. And once we collated this data, we published it, and it was available freely or in the form of publications to all the academicians, research, and industry to figure out, where are the wind speeds and how much are the resource. So I think this is something which is fundamental and is one of the, I would say, one of the lessons learned that, or the best practices that you go with the wind resource assessment exercise. So today we have a very good map of India and very intense measurement campaign where we have more than I think 1,000 monitoring masts which have been set up by the government, by NIWE, and also a very large capacity now set up by the private sector, which may be double of what is already there from the government. So if we look at it, any technology before it can be taken up on a very large scale needs some sort of demonstration, and which gives the comfort to all these stakeholders. This is going to work, and it's going to work in the manner they are looking at it, and this also helps in the project design and things like that. So in 1985-87, we set up the first wind farms in India. Before that, there were no wind farms. And just for the records, the very first wind turbine which was set up in India was a turbine called Polanco of Dutch make, which was 40 kilowatt wind turbine. And this was set up on the coast of Gujarat in a place called Verawat in 1984-85. And this was a 40 kilowatt wind turbine. It's not there anymore because that is an area where it's subject to very heavy corrosion and things like that. But that was the very first wind machine which was set up in India. After that, we set up a number of wind farms with Vestas 55 kilowatt wind turbines. These were set up again in Gujarat, in Tamil Nadu, and off the coast of Maharashtra as well. And after going through this process, we sort of felt that this is a technology which is workable with a lot of potential to harnesses all over the country. And there was also this thinking that the private sector should be involved in this. And to get the private sector involved, we needed a bigger demonstration of the projects. Bigger demonstration of the technology, and that's when Danida came in, and we set up two large wind farms, one in Gujarat and one in Tamil Nadu, with 250 kilowatt wind turbines. Here in the photograph you can see these are the demonstration wind farms, and this 200 kilowatt in 230, this is the Kayatar wind farm which was set up with the Maiken wind turbines. And they had an Indian partner which was called a Natural Energy Processing Company, the NEPC. And then Maiken and NEPC, they went into a joint venture to manufacture these wind turbines. There were a lot of entrepreneurship involved in this. And for quite some time after that, a wind turbine meant NEPC wind turbine. So NEPC meant a wind turbine for a very long time, maybe 5-6 years before other competitors could come in. In terms of institutional framework, it is very important that there is a good initiative from the government. And in India, initially, we had a department which was called the Department of Non-Conventional Energy Sources. But later it was upgraded to a full-fledged ministry, which is now called the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, which looks at the entire wind and renewable energy sector. And the other institutions which are involved here are, initially they were what we used to call them the state electricity boards. They have evolved and changed over the time and have been broken up or unbundled. So now there are the transmission companies, the distribution companies, the generation is it is delicensed, and so the generation can be done by any private sector entity. And then in 2003 we had a Electricity Act 2003, which was which brought about many changes in the electricity sector. And with that we had the State Electricity Regulatory Commission, which is, at every state, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, we had state electricity regulatory commissions, and then we had a central electricity regulatory commissions. And they initiated the process of feed-in tariff. So in 2003 onwards, we had something called feed-in tariffs, which was initiated, and in every state it was a different feed-in tariff. So it was not the same feed-in tariff everywhere. So, for example, if you take Tamil Nadu, where the wind speeds are high, the viability is achieved much faster. So the feed-in tariff was somewhat lower, while in Gujarat it was somewhat higher. In Madhya Pradesh it was still somewhat higher, and this also helped in setting up projects in all the different states. So we had these projects coming up in Maharashtra, Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. Everywhere there was a different feed-in tariff. Now, apart from that, there were also the public sector IPPs, like we have the public sector companies, which are National Thermal Power Corporation, NTPC. We had ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Commission. These are the government bodies. They also went into wind farms and established, I would say, some reasonable capacity. So this was like the market was opened up, and private sector wind farms were encouraged through tax incentives and incentives for setting up the captive power generation. I think I will be able to give you more details. And so in the policy framework, there were things like there was a big wheeling and banking arrangement. So any private entity could set up a wind farm, draw that electricity into a factory, and for drawing that electricity at the factory, they had wheeling and banking arrangements. So this was activated. There were electricity offtake arrangements where you could sell electricity to the electricity boards, and now it is discoms to whom it could be sold under an FIT. And the FIT regime was active till 2016. And after 2016, we have gone into a mode of what is called the reverse auctions. So very large projects are being auctioned by an entity called Solar Energy Corporation of India, SECI. These are also called the SECI auctions. And but after we started doing auctions and we sort of gave up feed-in tariffs, the growth rate sort of came down a little. And over the last 5-6 years, we have done almost 1 gigawatt per year, while earlier we were doing 2 to 3 gigawatt year sort of projects. But it's likely that very soon we will have a large capacity, because many projects have been auctioned and they are likely to come up in the next 2-3 years. So the different things were involved there. There was the issues related to the grid connection. There was a grid code, low voltage right through, high voltage right through, issues related to reactive power. All these had to be resolved by the electricity entities, which was the the Central Electricity Authority, the transmission utilities, and all these organizations. And then there was also an important aspect that there was some sort of target setting. So even now we have had a target of having something like 175 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2022, which has come to an end. We have not achieved the target entirely, but a good capacity has been set up. Apart from that, we have a very large manufacturing capacity, almost more than 10 gigawatt per year. So we are not able to fully use this manufacturing capacity, but it's also an important part of the industrial ecosystem in wind energy. It also creates a lot of employment in the sector, and many of these manufacturers are also making wind turbines and trying to export these to other countries. So this is one more option, one more aspect of the wind power development. And it also, leads to indigenous development of wind power, which is, very, very useful for any country. So this is more or less how things have evolved. We have reached something like 42 gigawatt with these different kinds of initiatives. And now we are looking at offshore wind farms. We are also looking at probably very soon we will look at floating wind turbines. There is a policy on hydrogen, green hydrogen, BESS, which is the battery energy storage systems, small wind turbines. And there again, we may have to look at things in the similar manner, have a demonstration of the projects, make them work. And there is an option already out for seabed rights for developing offshore wind farms. So things will evolve and continue to move forward. But we can draw lessons how we did in the past and how we can move forward with this. That's all. So thank you.
Thank you, Jami. Something that comes out to me in this is that there's at least 3 layers of record keeping that is also important. Apart from the individual organizations, there's the question of national state regulation, different levels of state or provincial or municipal government legislations, and also private sector. And all of these are record producers and keepers. Most countries are subject to a Public Records Act, and some countries have specifications on how the private sector must archive and maintain their records. So all of that will, I think, be important to consider when thinking about the whole question of archives and records. I see that Paul Gipe has come from California now, joined the webinar. Welcome to you. I know it's very early in the morning in California. So now we'll have Jana Kruse speak, director of the Nordic Folkecenter for renewable energies in Denmark. I'd also like to say at a personal level, I owe a lot to the Folkecenter. I spent 6 months working with them in Denmark about 15 or even a bit more years ago, and learned a lot about the global energy sector. And I'd also like to take the time, because I haven't had a chance to since it happened, to pay tribute to Preben Megard, the former director of the Folkecenter, and also co-founder of the World Wind Energy Association, who died last year. So I'd like to pay tribute to him. Okay, over to you, Jana.
Thank you. Thank you, Kolja Abramski, and thank you to Martina Himkova that has invited Nordic Folkecenter for this Zoom seminar about wind energy. Kolja, I will ask so friendly that you can help me put my PowerPoint presentation on the screen.
Are you able to do that? Do you have the PowerPoint?
I have sent it to Martina.
And I sent it to you, Kolja, because my computer blocks when I turn on another window. Thank you for this.
Give me a minute or two to.
We will do it. And then is it okay I talk a little when you are doing it?
Yes, that would be perfect.
Thank you so much. So the wind energy, the first really wind energy installation that was put up in Denmark was around 900. And it was down in a school where they want to try to use wind energy to make light in the village. And they were quite successful. And it was from a person called Paul Lacour, and he made wind energy and used the hydrogen to make light in this village. And after it was successful, he set up a school for people that could come to his area and learn about how to set up wind energy, the construction, and how to give the rural areas people that could work with wind energy. So he was called Thank you so much, Kolja. Now it was up. Yes. So
Yes.
he was calling it, I want to do education program for for people that can work with wind energy in the rural areas. So it was the background. And when we talk about it in the new time, when we come up to the more new time, and it is around 1970, that we talk about clean energy for common good. So back in 1972, 73, 74, there we have an energy crisis worldwide. And especially Denmark, we are a little country with 5 million people, 5 million citizens, that we were very shocked about the energy crisis. Denmark was more or less, just wait a little, Kolja.
Okay.
So Denmark was nearly 100% dependent on oil to the cars, to the electricity for our heat in our household. So when the price for oil was raising over 2 weeks from 38 euros per 1,000 liter of oil to 400 euros for 1,000 liter of oil, then we get really shocked. And then different groups in Denmark start to look from Johannes Juel, that was working with wind energy in a period for his electric company that was placed a little south of Copenhagen. And next, please. So he has set up in the south part of Sjælland a 10 kilowatt windmill in 1950, and in a little island, a new one on 45 in 1952, and then the Jäger wind turbine that was a 200 kilowatt wind turbine. And about these work, what he was doing, that he made a presentation of all his know-how in Rome, in a United Nations conference in 1961 in Rome. And there he was describing together with Hytter, how they could make a modern windmill that was well running. But after a period, 5-6 years, his company took the decision, no, to go after wind energy is not the future. That we stop, we will not longer work with it. So when we have these energy situation in the 70s, there was 4 to 5 groups that start to look what could we do with a modern wind energy. And today, Kolja, I would ask, and I will tell about the group that Nordic Folkecenter was in, but it was not only Nordic Folkecenter for renewable energy that was working, there was more groups around in Denmark. And we also have to remember that the big school in Ulfborg called Twin Power set up a windmill, first a 22 kilowatt windmill, and then later a 2 megawatt windmill. But this story I will not take today. I will look on the small groups, how they were working in Denmark. So we took a decision, all the groups that was working, that we every year 2 times a year will meet and talk about what was going well in the wind energy development and what was going bad. And today we will have called it open source, but in this time we just call it meeting, where we was meeting, okay? And then some of the group where Nordic Folkecenter was part of it, wait a little, yeah, was part of it. We went through this report from the 1961 from the seminar that was held from United Nations, and it was the first renewable energy seminar in the world. And there we could see how the windmill was built up. And we took a lot of know-how from this situation. And then we, in our group here up in the north part of Jutland, we make the first 5 22 kilowatt windmills. And it was sold here locally. It was produced here locally. The only things we get from abroad was from Italy, where we get a yawing gear system. But all the other things was here. And the blade, the wings for the windmill we need to have, that we get from Jäger wind, that we order 5 sets of windmills with 3 windmills on each, so 15 wind blades, and it was developed and it was delivered, so that we in 1978 could put up the first 5 windmills. I will just make a little hop up to what are going on just today in Denmark. We have around 5,000 windmills from around 100 kilowatt and up to 14 megawatt windmills. And then we have around 1,000 small windmills that also are developed here in Denmark and tested in Nordic Folkecenter, and they are placed around in Denmark. And when we talk about small windmills, we talk only about up to 55 kilowatt energy. So it means that all these 5,000 bigger windmills and the 1,000 smaller, it gives in Denmark around over a year 62 to 65% of our consumption for electricity. And I also have to say from the beginning that we want to do Denmark industry and manufacturing wind energy. It was the political background that we get so much support. We get also support of money, not so much, but a lot of support of that it was the right way to go with the windmill. And therefore, Kolja, I like very much your introduction to this seminar, because it is quite important what wind energy can, where we have countries where we have good wind, what we can do. So next. So back in 1985, the big red spot on Denmark, the card over Denmark, that was more where we get the oil production. We have big power station, and there we delivered all over the country the needs of electricity and the need of heat also, of course. And when we have these oil crises, we move more to coal. We get it from Australia, Colombia, Poland, all over, and it was sailed into our country and delivered. And then I took year 2030, the other map, where you see all, still some red spot, of course, but also a lot of other things. And it was wind energy, and it was combined heat and power based also on wind energy. So the situation from 1985 that was very central went more to more decentral production of electricity in our country. I will say that when we have these open meetings after or in the beginning of the 70s, we also took the decision to start up a renewable energy association, and it was this renewable energy association that was set up in 1975 that organized all these meetings around in Denmark that we have it. And after we were going from a 22 kilowatt windmill, and we went them bigger and bigger. So that in the beginning of the industry, also where we set up industry, we have in Denmark 25 different companies that produce the wind energy. And the customers, the market, who was the market? It was for long, long time, villages, working places that went together and set up wind energy in what we call windmill cooperatives. So that we buy shares in a 200 kilowatt windmill. That could be, there was 42 families that go in and buy different shares. And then we bought the windmill cash from the companies, and then they come and set it up. And then we have such a windmill running for more than 20 years. So the tools that could go to the companies and was well construction, the tower, the control system, the blade, all was well construction, so that we could give from the companies the guarantees come to the market and said, these windmill here can go for at least 20 to 25 years always. So we can say that these big success that we have with wind energy, and we know today that we are together with China, one of the biggest producer of wind energy in our country. And I think it's interesting also when we look a little back. If we look a little back, we could see that there was different wind machines, and that we will also see maybe in the rest of the seminar, that some has 2 blades, some has 4 blades. And when we were working in these open source, we find out in our country that 3 blades that give a more stable rotation in the windmill. So in 1979, there was a decision taking of the groups and the companies that have started to set up wind machines, that it was a 3-blade windmill, and it was 2 of each other brake system we have in the windmills. So the wings was, the blade on the windmill was made so that we could have an air brake and also a mechanic brake in our windmills. It's like a car where we also have two of each other independent brake system. And that's of course interesting to look back in the history that we so early said that it could be the modern Danish windmill. And in international, we was calling the Danish concept with the three blades and with the two brake system. And in when we were looking earlier back in the windmills, we often saw that the blade was running against the clock, if we could say so. And these three windmills that I showed that Johannes Juhl has made, it was on clock. And then when Jäger, when we order these five set of blades by Jäger in 1977, that was a decision taking that it should go clockwise. And then I don't know if it is still so worldwide, but at least now the windmills in Denmark are going with the clock. So so it is, and I like very much to hear also from China that you will make such a pioneer with the wind energy pioneers in your country. And I can say that for 2 years ago, our national TV set up interview with 9 pioneers here from Denmark, and that was making such a TV program where each of the pioneers talk 43 to 45 minutes. So, and it has also been very popular, and I think it's a good thing that we can make such history so it's well functioned. Today in Nordic Folkecenter, we stopped to develop the wind energy when we come to the 525 kilowatt windmill. Then we stop our design office, and then we make a little step back and still work for the small windmills that we can integrate near the household. And we are still working with that. These, what you are seeing here, that is a 2 megawatt windmill place not so far from our place. And the next. And the windmill we can place very near the animals. When the windmill is over and not can continue making electricity, then we take it down, and 5 minutes after, the cows can come and take the grass also under that. Yes, next one. Here it is in one of the coast islands, fishing village, that has taken a decision to set up 3 windmills, and all are owned by the local people. And I can just say to you here in the seminar, we have to involve people when we set up wind energy. We are in the Nordic Folkecenter making a model for the different success story where there has been no groups that has go against to set up windmill, and all are showing when people are involved, information, and can be with it also, and the income, the profit from the windmill go to develop the local area, then people are very positive. Next. And now I'm going on the beach on this harbor, what you just see, and it is these 3.4 megawatt Vestas windmill that are set up there. Yes, next one. And it is one of the history things that you know that in UK they took a decision to continue building nuclear, and they need a lot of support from money, and they need to have the guarantee for the money for 35 years. And we know that onshore wind power, and this here is from Brazil, that they can do it with these US 0.04 US dollars per kilowatt hour. And today the conclusion, at least in our country, is that wind energy is today the most cheapest way to do electricity, and it is continue that Denmark will continue set up wind energy onshore and offshore. And we have, with our new government that was organized today, they come out with a program what we said that we want to be CO2 neutral, as a climate gases neutral in year 2045. So that is our new tools to go after. Yes, next one. We have a lot of district heating in Denmark, also where we earlier used gas engines or coal or oil engines, but today it's changed. Now we set up wind energy, we set up solar heating system, we set up solar PV, solar cells installation also. So that is the tools that we will go. We will still do a lot of district heating, but we will go, we are on the way to take away the fossil energy and go in with wind and solar. Next one. And that is a picture I took from the computer one day, and it was back in year 2015, and the wind power shares in the whole Denmark was these 119%, and the CO2 was 44 gram per kilowatt hour. And the day on the other slide, it was in year 2014, we have no wind, or it was very little, and there you can see how much CO2 we then burned off through the gas and also some coal and some oil. Next one. So thank you for being with you, and thank you for the presentation I have been listened to here until now. And next year, Nordic Folkecenter will have a 40 years celebration, and we will send out a program, and we will welcome all the people that we through so many years has worked together with. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think there's a number of points that also raise quite interesting questions for archives. The fact that it's community driven and grassroots raises very important questions, but also the fact that it's quite decentralized, because if the energy structure is decentralized, the record structures will be decentralized as well, which means there'll be pockets of archives and records scattered all over the place. And the question of how to identify them, how to gather them, raises very difficult questions. Another thing that you talk about is the discontinuity between the 2 blades and the 3 blades. I think that's very important, because those 2 blades will need archiving. They're a very important part of the history, even though there was a general consensus to more or less reject them over time and move to the 3-blade. So the whole question of how to archive discontinuities and avoid those histories being lost is very important.
Yeah.
I think now we probably should go to a break because it's been quite a intensive session and lots of presentations. If people are up for coming back at 5 to whatever hour it is in your country. In Britain, that would be 5 to 2. In continental Europe, 5 to 3, and I'm not sure in other places, but 5 to before the hour. That would be excellent. And then we can start with Galyna and then Galyna and Galal and Arne, Jäger and Everaldo and Paul Gipe for that second session, if that's okay with people.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So
See you after
See
the
you.
break.
yeah, in 10 minutes.
Okay, if people are back now, we will instead be starting with Everaldo Feitosa's presentation, as apparently he is going to the airport shortly. So we'll do that first. Everaldo, are you here? Everaldo?
Hello?
Hello?
Okay. Yes.
Hi,
Okay.
nice to see you again.
Okay.
Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kolya. Yeah. So, first I would like to thank for the WWEA and Mills Arcade for this initiative of this conference. I think is when I see old friends in the conference and the faces is very important to remember the old times. Yeah. So in reality, before making this kind of presentation related to Brazil, it's important to include Brazil in the global context. And in reality, I had opportunity to work with the pioneers of wind turbines in the 80s and 70s. I have started working with wind turbine in the nearly 40 years ago. I was working with the structural dynamics of helicopters in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics in the University of Southampton, England. And I shifted to work with the structural dynamics of wind turbines. So was more or less the same methodology, the same analytical and the same equations of helicopters and turbines, and was a very good time 40 years ago. It's important to mention the pioneers and the vision of a lot of people at the time when the mainstream of the politics was oil and nuclear. And it's important to mention the people like Preben Margaret from Professor Niels Meyer from also the university in Copenhagen, Denmark, Hermann Scher in Germany, Jos van Beek in Holland, also in Germany. And at scientific level, it's very important to mention the work of Andrew Garrett from Garrett Rasson in England, Jim Manuel in the USA, Mike Bergey, and Paul Gipe in the USA also. So it's very important to mention these old friends in order to go ahead. So without them, we never would have this opportunity to show and to present the success of the wind energy in the world. So this is my initial comments, and let's go to the next one. Just 1 second, please. Yeah. Well, in here, I'm going back to the 60 because the windmill history also has some roots in the old American type windmills used in the American West, like they have been known as the aeromotor. And in Brazil, in the 1960s, they have been very popular. More than 5,000 windmills for water pumping in the semi-arid region of Brazil. Well, all of you know quite well this technology, but they have a lot of problems for corrosion, saline water, maintenance problems, and so on. So it's very important to mention in a country like Brazil, these kind of roots. Yeah. So the old America type windmill. And can you see the next one? Can I see the next? Yeah,
The next one. Okay.
Next one. Yeah. So based on them, well, no. Yeah. No.
The previous one?
Previous one, yes.
Yeah.
Previous
Yeah.
one. Yes. I cannot. Yeah, that's okay. So what has, I think it's very important to show this as a history, because in 1980, in Brazil, we have a new concept of windmills for water pumping. This was a world innovation using compressed air connected to the main rotor. So in reality, we have the old America type windmill on the top of a lattice tower with multi-bladed windmills, and compressed air connected to the main shaft. And in reality, we have been generating compressed air. This compressed air will be injected in the well, and different types of water pumping using compressed air has been used. So with this new technology, simplicity, reliability, and low maintenance has been the main characteristic of this new system. It's important to mention that this development have been done in some connections with the old Soviet Union, with the Moscow Aviation Institute. It's incredible how we had this cooperation with Moscow Aviation Institute, because at that time, 40, 50 years ago, they had a project of large windmills using compressed air for electrical generation. So in other words, the compressed air will be pumped to an air motor, and the air motor will generate electricity. Of course, we have a lot of difficulties in terms of efficiency, but we have used this kind of technology, simplified this technology, and instead of working for water, for electricity generation, we have used it for pumping water. So at historical level, it's very important to mention this kind of technology. I think very low scientific papers, and I have not find anything, because this has been lost during the last decades. Okay, next one, please. So we have used a lot of these pumps in Brazil, in Middle East, in Africa, with this new technology of water pumping using compressed air. So at before year 2000, we have the first installation of the what I call coated large, where in reality large 90 kilowatts at that time was very large for electricity generation in Brazil and Latin America. This has been the first turbines used in the whole Latin America. This has been done under cooperation between the Folkecenter, Denmark, and the Brazilian Wind Energy Center. We had these two prototypes, 90 kilowatt machines, one in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the island of Fernando de Noronha, and the other in the city of Olinda, both of them in Brazil. Can I have the next one? Yeah. So having a wind turbine installed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So can you go before?
Back
please?
again?
Just,
Yeah.
No, the map. No. Yeah.
The map. Yeah.
The map. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. For example, we have the installation. We have done this together with the Folkecenter in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We can see the island of Fernando de Noronha in the blue, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So in reality, most of the components have been transported by airplanes to the island, and another one in Noronha. Yeah. So if you see this 25 years ago, 30 years ago, this has been a war work. Can you see the next one, please? So in the island, yeah, can you, a little bit, just the title. Yeah. So in the island of Fernando de Noronha, at the same time, this has been a pioneer work, a lot of work in terms of infrastructure, of transport for the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And at the same time, this has been the largest wind diesel hybrid system in South America. So we had also a cooperation between Folkecenter and the Result Lab in Denmark, working together. So in the island, we have an intelligent system, the wind turbine linked with the desalination water plant, linked with pumping water to the island of more than 2,000 people. So 20 years ago, this kind of advanced work is very important to mention here. Next one, please. Next. No, I think you skipped the
Olinda.
No, yeah, the Olinda, yes.
Yeah, yeah, you said to go next. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Also under this cooperation, we had the first PPA agreement in South America. So the idea was also to use a wind turbine. This was together with the Folkecenter, Windward, and this PPA agreement, the electricity was used for the historical city of Olinda, yeah, one of the oldest cities in Brazil. So at the same time was a very good publicity work in terms of demystify the use of wind energy at that time. Next one. Yeah, based on these two pioneers' work on the island of Fernando de Noronha and also in Olinda, in Brazil, the government has decided to make a program called ProInfa, feed-in tariff, for 1,100 megawatt of installed capacity. So this was in the year 2002 and has been a success. So after the two prototypes, this has been the main road for the Brazilian sector, wind energy sector. Next one, please.
Sorry.
Yeah. So in 2009, in this timeline, the Brazil has decided to implement the first wind energy auction in the world. So at that time was something that the people found it crazy, how wind energy would compete with hydro, with biomass, with oil and gas, with all other source of electricity. So the wind has been included in the competitive basis without any kind of subsidy. And it was a surprise that in the first wind auction in the world, wind energy has won this first auction. So after that, we have been implementing auctions every year. We can see the next slide, please. And again, this is a very important fact. Also, Jäger from the Folkecenter has mentioned. So we had the lowest wind energy price in the world. So we, from 2009, the first wind auction, up to years 2020, 2022, we have this kind of revolution in Brazil, yeah, and a kind of a showcase to the world. Next one. Next one, please.
Not the wind atlas?
Yes, yeah, okay. So for this lowest wind energy price in the world, we have two parameters that have a large connection between these results. The first one is the wind resource, the kind of wind that you have in Brazil, and very high capacity factors. With the new machines at the moment, the capacity factor is varying between 55% and 60%. And some of the problems that we have is how the turbines will survive. So this is another question. This is a technical, scientific work to be done, but this is the reason why the wind energy price is so low in Brazil. Next one. When I mean Brazil, I mean the northeast region of Brazil. This is the region where 99% of the wind energy projects are located. So today, if you analyze this history, we have the figures of 23,000 megawatts of wind capacity installed and growing, also with offshore in a lot of projects, and also the large wind energy projects for hydrogen production. But this 23,000 megawatts, all of this capacity is on land. Next one. So a little bit, yeah, okay. So apart from the good wind resource in which we will have the implication of a high capacity factor, the main argument for this exponential growth of wind energy in Brazil is this optimal wind conditions, optimal match between the water behavior in the large rivers and the wind behavior in the northeast of Brazil. So I have shown this graph for more than 30 years. So it's very old. All my friends in the World Wind Energy Association know them, but this is important to show the past and the importance of this main argument for the development of wind energy in Brazil. So this kind of matching between the water has been the main driving force for the success that we have at the moment. Next one, please. And this is the last slide. So what we have now, onshore wind installations in Brazil, 23,000 megawatts. If you analyze the top 5 countries in the world, Brazil is number 6. And the only, I would say, situation that is still one obstacle for growing of wind installations in Brazil is the grid capacity. This is the only point. So the country is doing a huge work at the moment in order to reinforce the grid capacity in the main substations, in the northeast of Brazil. And if we have this done in the next 5 years, we are going to double the installed capacity in Brazil from 23 to nearly 50 gigawatt of wind capacity in the next 5-6 years. So this is a huge jump, but we are very optimistic that this is a reality that will happen in Brazil. Next one, please. This is the last one. Yes. And thank you very much for the opportunity of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Everaldo. I see that you basically touch a number of issues that again raise sort of different questions. You start by highlighting the role of pioneer individuals, and I think that's a very important question, because many archives will exist in individual hands of people who are still alive, in individual hands of people who are no longer alive. And how to ensure that the important personal archives are maintained is a very important question. Another thing you highlight is how certain records you think have already disappeared. The question of the records of the compressor related to the compressed air related turbines and the international transfer technology with Moscow. International transfer itself, I think, raises very interesting questions, because where will archives be? Will they be in Denmark? Will they be in Brazil? Will they be in Moscow? All of these, questions, it's no simple answer to where the archives are and who is protecting them. The other thing you showed is how there was a global shift towards auctions, and the actions in one country had an important impact globally. That Brazil was the first in what then later became a wider global shift, and in a way, a different phase of the whole global energy sector when there was a shift to auctions. So I think, again, that sort of raises questions of how you think of the change and how you document the change, and only realizing with interpretation the significance of certain events. Those events will produce archives, but how to interpret them, that they were actually very globally significant. So I think now let's hear from Ukraine, from Galyna Shmidt, from the Ukrainian Wind Energy Association. I hope that your internet's been holding out and you've managed to follow this webinar until now. Hello, Andre, also. I think you're still on mute.
Kolya, do you have my presentation? I also sent it a few days ago to Martina. I am so sorry, but today you are the most important person.
Okay, I don't think I have it. Do I have it yet, Martina?
No, you don't have it, but if you give me a moment, I will try to send it. I'm doing everything from my phone, so I can be a bit slow.
All right. Well, why not start? We're seeing it currently on the screen.
You have seen it?
Yeah. You've managed to put it on.
Okay.
It seems to be no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try.
Okay.
Energy from wind was used in Ukraine as early as 19th century. In 1917, there were about 30,000 windmills on the territory of Ukraine. Ukraine has a great wind potential. More than 7,000 square kilometers of land can be used for wind farm development. The wind resources are spread over the territory of Ukraine unevenly. The wind potential is much higher in the southern part of the country than in the north. No, it does not work. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's come on.
Yeah, so this slide shows you the wind power in Ukraine before the Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there were 34 wind farms operating in my country. Almost 359 megawatt of wind capacity were added in 1921, bringing the total installed capacity to almost 1.7 gigawatt. More than 3 billion euros have been already invested in the wind farm projects in Ukraine. And here you see the map of Ukraine with wind farms locations. As you see, majority are located in the northern part, in the southern part of Ukraine. In the context of the Ukrainian wind power history, the name of Yuri Kondratyuk is unforgettable, at least it should be. Yuri Kondratyuk was born in 1897 in Poltava, Ukraine. He is one of the pioneers of astronautics and spaceflight, who in the early 20th century developed the first known key concept for landing and return spaceflight from the Earth to the Moon. This concept was later used for the plotting of the first actual human spaceflight to the Moon. Yuri Kondratyuk lived and made all his discoveries in the circumstances of continuous persecution from the Soviet authorities. He was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in a prison camp. In fact, Yuri Kondratyuk, the name under which he is well known both in Ukraine and abroad, was a stolen identity he assumed in 1921 for his own protection. His born name is Alexander Shagriy. Yuri Kondratyuk is also a wind pioneer, famous in Ukraine for designing several models of wind turbine. And I must say that his wind turbine designs were ahead of the time. Thus, the first in Ukraine and in the whole Soviet Union, because at that time Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union, 100 kilowatt wind turbine was developed and installed at Balaklava in the south and west coast of the Crimean Peninsula under the leadership of Yuri Kondratyuk. You see the drawings of this wind turbine on the left side of my slide. The Balaklava wind turbine weighed 9 tons and had a blade span of 30 meters. Crimean wind turbine powered up the entire Balaklava-Sevastopol tram line. His another wind turbine design was a 1 megawatt machine. In 1932, Yuri Kondratyuk designed a 2-storied wind turbine with a total capacity of 10 megawatt, 5 megawatt per each level. The first level height was 65 meters and the second one 150 meters. In 1937, the construction of the world's most powerful at that time wind turbine began on Mountain Ipetri in Crimea. Though the foundation was made, Soviet officials stopped the construction in 1938. Unfortunately, this wind turbine has never been built. After the Second World War, the Soviet government again reverted to the idea of using wind power to restore the national economy. In 1946, Kiev Machine Building Plant mastered the production of a wind power engine VD 3.5 with a capacity of 3.5 kilowatt. A wind turbine was mounted on a 12 meters wooden pole and has very simple, and it was very simple, comprising of a wind wheel, a switchboard, a motor, and 2 accumulators to store energy for a windless time. About 50,000 such machines were planned to produce. These wind turbines were called new machines of blue coal and used mainly for water supply and DC electricity production in agricultural sector. The next period in the national wind industry history coincided with the beginning of the conversion process in the former Soviet Union. It was decided to develop a wind turbine of Ukrainian design, and Yuzhny Design Bureau at the Yuzhny Machine Building Plant in the city of Dnipro, at that time it was Dnipropetrovsk, was selected for this task. In general, they designed 42 different models of wind turbines, and there was no one model similar to another one. This slide shows you, for example, one of wind turbine prototypes with a tower consisted of 3 parts produced from a rocket motor housing made of plastic. It has never operated, as the first test revealed a lot of defects in the experimental design of this wind turbine. Firstly, it was very expensive technology as a whole military industry of the Soviet Union. And secondly, when the wind blew, the windmill tower behaved like a rod made of fiberglass. In their further designs, the Design Bureau Yuzhny used only steel towers. And finally, in the late 19th, they designed the first wind turbine with a unit capacity of 250 kilowatt AVE 250. It was installed at 3 wind farms in the Crimea. And here you see a photo of Adjigolska wind farm commissioned in 1992. There was another design of Ukrainian wind turbine with unit capacity of 420. Despite some unique ideas, the design had 2 main defects. A large dynamic moment, therefore it was very difficult to stop the turbine, and steel blades. When the steel blades rotated, they produced a visible flickering effect on the television screen. In September 2004, during the testing operation, the wind turbine shattered into pieces. The production of licensed wind turbine has been the main path of the wind energy industry development in Ukraine. Within the framework of the conversion program, 23 enterprises of military industrial background were involved in manufacturing wind turbine components. This campaign was launched under the motto, "Clean energy instead of guns." To start production of a wind turbine under USA license, a special Ukrainian-American joint venture, Windenergo, was set up in Ukraine. From American side, there were such companies as US Wind Power, a wind energy department of Kinetec Wind Power, and Putman, Hayes, and Bartlett. From Ukrainian side, it was Yuzhny machine building plant. Kinetec Wind Power granted its license to Windenergo in 1993, and serial production and assembling of licensed wind turbine with unit capacity of 107.5 kilowatt were launched in Ukraine in 1994. In February 1997, a state complex program for wind farm construction was launched in the country and provided for installing 1990 megawatt by the end of 2010. But in reality, only 87.36 megawatt were installed in Ukraine by the end of this program. The main reason for such a failure was selecting a wind turbine model that has never been evaluated in terms of its suitability for wind conditions in Ukraine. The state complex program focused mainly on setting up a domestic manufacturer for wind turbines rather than on generating electricity from wind. So as a result of this program, 701 wind turbines with unit capacity of 107.5 kilowatt and 20 wind turbines by Belgium producer Turbowinds with unit capacity of 600 kilowatt were installed in Ukraine. In 2010, the further production of this machine were terminated due to their inefficiency and lack of demand. Some wind farms in the Crimea that were commissioned in the frame of the in summer 2006, GLS wind turbine generator TG750 with rated capacity of 750 kilowatt was installed near the city of Dnipro. The main distinguishing features of this turbine was a turbo generator wind energy conversion system without a speed multiplier using synchronous TG50 wind turbine was developed by a bureau headed by Golubenko, a former design bureau. Fortunately, the wind turbine inefficient and few years decommissioned. The real deployment in Ukraine started in 2009. Introduction of feed-in, as we call it in Ukraine, the green tariff still a driving engine for the development of power in Ukraine. In 2011, company FWT Ukraine from Kramatorsk got a license for manufacturing wind turbine FL 2500 with a capacity of 2.5 megawatt from its German partner Frühlander AG. FWT Ukraine is the first and currently the only company in Ukraine to manufacture modern megawatt class wind turbines. Their products line includes models from 2.5 megawatt up to 4.8. Here you see the beautiful photos of modern wind farms in Ukraine. 2011 will stay in the history of Ukraine wind industry as a year when the first private commercial wind farms comprising megawatt class wind turbines were implemented. Now we have wind turbines produced by Vestas, GE, Nordax, installed in Ukraine. Russia's military aggression has inflicted considerable damage on the whole energy sector of Ukraine. energy infrastructure facilities have been systematically shelled and destroyed by the Russian troops since the very first days of the war. Russia's aggression and temporary occupation of some territories of Ukraine deprived the country of a significant part of the green generation. As I said at the beginning of my presentation, the most windy and solar sites in Ukraine are located in the southern part of my country, the territories where the active hostilities still continues. And right now we know at least about 7 wind turbines that have been struck in the course of the war. You see the photo of one of such wind turbines, but the real number could be higher. Right now, the wind farm operators has no access to their sites located in the areas controlled by the Russian forces. And now back to more positive information. As a part of our association activity to raise awareness of wind power and with special focus on children, in 2021, we issued a special book for kids, Secrets of Wind. And this book also contains a lot of historical information, also about our famous Yuri Kondratyuk, and some, let's say, information that children can use in their life. So here you see also the photos made during the presentation of this book at International Book Arsenal Festival in Kyiv in May 2021. More than 3,000 copies have been disseminated among school and libraries in local communities where wind farms are located. So that is all I was going to briefly tell about the history of wind development in Ukraine. And during the whole history, you see that we start wind development, especially during the stage in history of our country when we start to think about the peace. So wind power really means peace and democracy. Glory to Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I think you sort of really highlight some of the most urgent issues at the moment. That obviously Ukraine is in a very different situation from most of the countries or all of the countries where there have been presentations today. And I think the war raises sort of also some particularly archival questions. On the one hand, there'll be extra danger for the records that they will be destroyed in conflict. And on the other hand, what can be the role of records in reconstruction in terms of actually knowing what was destroyed? So I think there's very sort of particular archival questions. Maybe now if we could go over to Galal from Egypt. Are you here, Galal? I'm not sure if Galal was here, but I think he might have become disconnected. So
no, he's not here.
Yeah, I think he's not here. So if we go on to Arne Jäger, while we're waiting for Galal. Arne is from the Deutsches Windkraftmuseum, the German wind energy museum.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes? Is it okay?
Yep, it's good.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, before I start my presentation, I would like to stress the fact that I had a good and warm contact to Preben Megard as well, starting in 2003. And I have visited him for approximately 15 times since then. I had good times at the Folkecenter, and I I still miss him, I have to say. About 2 weeks ago, I went to Folkecenter again after 3 years, and I'm very happy to see the center is still working well and has survived all these serious crises that we've had in the recent years. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say at the very beginning. So now I'm focusing on my screen. Can you see the presentation? Is it working?
Yes.
Yes, it's working.
Good.
Great, great. So before I start my short presentation on the German Wind Power Museum, I'd like to say that due to the massive lack of time we have, I decided to break down my presentation solely on the museum and not focusing on the German wind power development in general. So just in case you're wondering what's going on. So I'm the museum manager of the German Wind Power Museum. That museum was officially founded in 1999 in a small village called Stemmwede, which is about 30 kilometers north of Osnabrück. Osnabrück is in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, which is in the western part of Germany. We currently have about 100 members, of which only 5 really work hard. I'm one of these 5. We currently have about 41 exhibits on display and stocked. In our stock, we have about 30 wind turbines currently lying on the ground. We have commercial and homemade wind turbines. And as far as I know, because the collection is really big, as far as I know, we have about 102 rotor blades in our collection from various wind turbine blade manufacturers within Europe. Kruse mentioned that blade company Jäger from the late 1970s, early 80s. I have managed to save a whole set of Jäger blades from 1982. By the way, they were used on a homemade wind turbine. As far as I know, comparing us to the collection that Folkecenter has and to other small wind turbine museums in Denmark, as far as I know, we currently have the world's biggest collection of wind turbines. So another interesting fact is that we don't just focus on commercial wind turbines, but on homemade wind turbines as well. Homemade wind turbine means that one turbine has been built by an individual person once. And these machines, of course, are super unique because they were just made once. We have wind turbines from 7 countries in the world. Germany, which is our biggest part of the collection for sure. Switzerland, we have an old Electro wind turbine from Switzerland. We have the very first Dutch Lagerwey, which was installed in Germany in 1982, regarding the Netherlands. We have several Nordex machines from Denmark. We have an American Kenetech that was previously mentioned from the Ukraine. We have an American Bergey, which might be interesting for Mike Bergey as well. It's a 10 kilowatt Bergey XL. We have a France Bernier from 1994, which was installed at the University of Oldenburg. And we have a homemade turbine from the former German Democratic Republic, which is better known as East Germany. For this year and the next year, we have received EU and state funds, and we are trying hard to receive some more funding for building up our infrastructure. So here we have some photographs displaying, showing the wind turbines we have on display. On the upper left part, we see the Lagerwey, which has recently been fully restored. On the upper right side, we see a machine from German industry giant Dornier, which was built in 1980 and fully restored in 2009. On the lower right side, we see the installation of a Dutch Bosman wind pump. By the way, in the Netherlands, there are more Bosman wind pumps than traditional windmills, which is a fact very few people know about. Lower middle part, we see a turbine from Husum shipyard, HSW, and other machines in the background, for sure. And on the lower left side, once again, the Bosman machine and some other machines in the back. This is just to give you an impression of the open space part of the premises of our museum on those machines that have already been put on display. So here we have a close look up at the machines we have stocked in our large store. As you can see, it's quite big, and I can tell you it's tons of work, really tons of work, and we're still trying hard to restore more machines and getting a hand on all these things. Yeah, here's another two pictures. On the right side, blades from a Danish blade giant LM. On the left side, various machines from Germany. On the nacelle, it's written Tornado. This machine, by the way, was a homemade turbine from 1988. Some homemade turbines are very close to serial commercial production, and it clearly shows how skilled some homemade people are. What are our goals? What do we want? What do we stand for? What we want is very simple. We want to save as many wind turbines as possible from all around the world, whatever company, whatever background, whatever it is. We want to keep and honor and demonstrate these roots of modern wind energy, if it's Denmark, if it's Germany, the United States, of course, whatever. Create awareness, if possible, on a worldwide level for wind turbine history. That's what we're doing here already, which is very, very great. And of course, supporting wind energy in general. Especially in our area, politicians are, let's say, quite conservative. And we are trying hard to stand up for wind energy and to save to make sure people don't have such a bad impression of wind turbines, because we even have to fight some people from the radical right, which are even trying to defeat us, which is insane, but it's happening. So exhibits that we recently acquired in this year are, number one, a full set of Alternergy Aerostar 7.5. Alternergy was in the 1980s the biggest and most successful Danish blade company. These blades were built in '85. They were 7.5 meters long, 375 kilograms each. And that blade type, Aerostar 7.5, was extremely successful. It was spread all over the world, especially in California, even in Australia. The Australian company Westwind applied Aerostar 7.5 on their machines. Almost all major Danish companies in the 80s used Aerostar 7.5, including Vestas, Micon, Nortank, and others. I managed to save that set of blades. It was actually supposed to be thrown away. We got it in June this year, and according to the farmer that I had a contact with, these 3 blades were used on the very first Enercon ever built in 1985. The problem is that the labels have been removed from the blades. So currently there's no proof, but I'm trying to get some more information on this. So that's why I'm saying allegedly. I can't prove it right now, but if true, this is more than gigantic. Another blade we got this year is a 23-meter blade from experimental turbine from the 80s. It was developed and built by Voigt. The blade was built by MBB, Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm. It's 1.8 tons heavy. We got it in May this year, and it actually operated on a turbine with a 52-meter rotor on a 270 kilowatt, which is designed for application within a country, within Germany. That blade is mainly made of coal fiber, not glass fiber, but coal fiber, making it extremely light at the time. So here's another impression. If you look at the blade hood at the flange, this is the technology that we've had in 1980-81. The blade flange today look, more or less totally different. But at that time, it was modern. Now on the upper side, you can see how big that blade actually is. Current projects which are going on our premises are the blade exhibition that I am personally working on. I have already produced 11 blade stands made of metal. I produce these metal stands in my little shop at home. More stands are under production. It's a great way for displaying rotor blades and possibly other things, the collection. By the way, on the upper side, I'm currently cleaning a 16-meter long blade from German company Rasmussen, and that blade was applied on a 300 kilowatt Tacke, which was also sent to Brazil in 1996. That type, not these blades, but the type 300 kilowatt Tacke was applied in Brazil as well. It's a simple and cost-efficient way, and these blades are directly positioned on the ground. They are not bound to the ground, so they can be positioned anywhere on our premises. That's one of the great advantages. And for sure, they create a true hands-on experience. So you stand right in front of such a big blade, and you can touch it all over from the root up to the tip, which is interesting for really everyone, not just people from the industry, but possibly everyone. Here's some more pictures. On the upper left side, blade from Alternergy. In the middle, a 10-meter aluminium blade, which I got from Enercon. On the right side, an 8-meter blade from Vestas. On the upper right side, blades from German MAN, from Rasmussen and LM. On the lower right side, same blades as on the upper left. And on the lower left, a blade which was applied on a turbine made by Hossain Shipyard. They had a logo which was blue, yellow, red. Hossain Shipyard was a successful German company from the late 1980s and early and mid 1990s. That company already disappeared. They merged with the German Jacobs Energy and formed a new company called Repower Systems, which was later called Senvion and eventually disappeared from the market. Vital NRW is a program for developing rural areas in the countryside. We have received funds for 5 machines to be restored this year, next year. These funds are granted by the state government of NRW, which is North Rhine-Westphalia. These 3 machines are, as I already mentioned, the Dutch Lagerwey, 15 kilowatt, a German Krogmann, 50 kilowatt, a German NEW, which is Neue Energien Wiengebirge, 20 kilowatt, an Aeroman from German industry giant MAN, and the Hossain Shipyard, which is planned to be restored next year, just like MAN. We have received for this and next year a total sum of 133,000 euro, which sounds a lot, but actually isn't. Yeah, on the lower left side, you can see me removing the Lagerwey 15 kilowatt from its concrete stand. I did this to enable full restoration, which has already been taking place now. In the middle, you can see the German Krogmann, which is currently undergoing restoration. And on the right side, you can see the German NEW, which is undergoing restoration as well. Yeah, that's it. That's all I can tell you. We are, by the way, a non-profit organization. Like I said, it's 5 people who really work on it. On the paper, we are 100 members, and we are unfortunately, I have to say, we are positioned right in the middle of nowhere in a very rural area, in a very small village. But yeah, maybe we could all once meet again somewhere in the future. Yeah, thank you. That's what I can tell you about our German Museum.
Thank you, Arne. That was a really interesting presentation of what I can only imagine is an extremely difficult effort to preserve the physical record. I mean,
tons of
work. One thing about the documents, but it's a whole other thing. Rescuing industrial infrastructure where you obviously need very big logistics efforts, big physical space.
Oh yeah.
So very interesting. Actually, you say it would be good to meet again in the future. I'm
imagining, maybe, possibly.
I'm imagining as we're talking about this, having a physical on-site meeting at the museum, which could be, you know, somewhere down the line. I'm aware we've gone a very long time, so there's still a presentation from Paul Gipe from Windworks. I think it looks like Galal has fallen off, so we won't hear about the situation in Egypt. We can save that for another time. But if Paul Gipe could speak, and also I see that Michael Bergey is on this call. If you would be interested to do a sort of impromptu history of the small wind sector, either in the US or globally, whichever you would be interested, that would be very good. If you don't feel comfortable doing a impromptu one like that, that's also completely fine. But just to think about while Paul is giving his presentation.
Good morning, go aften, guten Tag for Arne, and bon dia for Everaldo Feitosa. So let me try and get the projection up right here. Okay, so my presentation is on the history of modern wind power, preserving records, artifacts, such as Arne is doing there in Germany, and ephemera. And let's see if we can go forward. So the need that we have is that the pioneers of the industry are dying off, and the rest of us are aging. Artifacts and ephemera are being scrapped. And we need to tell the true story of wind energy development. We have to thwart revisionist historians, and this is particularly true here in the United States. So we need permanent repositories. We need permanent repositories in North America and in Europe and possibly in other countries as well. So we need these localized repositories, both for hardware, as Arne is doing, and as the Folkecenter has done in Denmark. But we need those also in the USA and Canada, not just in Europe, but also in Britain. Britain has a role to play in this. And we need permanent collections. We need endowments that be able to fund work for historians and restorers to do this kind of work. And to accomplish that, we need state institutions, financial and political support. We must thwart revisionist history. We have to tell the story. And that's what I attempted to do in my most recent book, Wind Energy for the Rest of Us. That was my attempt to tell the history of modern wind energy development from my perspective as one of the early pioneers of wind energy here in the United States. And also that's what Eric Mollestrom and myself did in writing 2 journal articles explaining in a summary form the history of early wind energy development. The links to those 2 articles, they were journal articles published in Wind Engineering. And Eric is also now publishing an article summarizing our findings in the Encyclopedia of Renewable Energy. That'll be forthcoming.
Paul, we cannot see that you're changing slides. We just see the first slide. I think you're not on that anymore.
Yeah, no, I'm way past that. So what do you see?
Yes, the title page. At least I am.
Okay, Koya, what do you see?
The same.
Okay, do you have my presentation, Koya?
I don't think so. Martina, did you send that to me?
Yeah, it was sent several days.
No, let me send it now.
Okay. Carry on. It will take a little while to get it up,
Yeah,
but I'll
just carry on because
Yeah.
the message I can say verbally, and you have the presentation, so you can send it out as a part of your conclusion.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know why that's not working because I'm on the share screen. It could be that it's a connection between United States and Europe. I don't know. So anyway, so I want to go to collections in the USA. Jim Dielson, who was the founder of Zahn Systems, he had started collecting hardware. Most of that, of course, was hardware that had been used on the Zahn site here in Tehachapi, California. I don't know what the status of that collection is. I suspect it may be just laying on the ground someplace in Tehachapi, or it's been hauled off to a scrapyard. Jim Dielson's no longer living in the United States, so I have no idea what's happened to that collection. York County in Pennsylvania's History Center has both some artifacts and ephemera. All the documents that I had in my possession on a Smith Putnam wind turbine development have been donated to the York County History Center. The reason for that is York County and York, the city of York, Pennsylvania, is where the Smith company was of the Smith Putnam wind turbine development. The University of Massachusetts in Amherst also has some ephemera, has documents on the Smith Putnam wind turbine project. The Smithsonian Air and Space Museum also has some ephemera, but it seems to have limited interest. There we go.
What slide should I go to?
Okay, so let's just go on. We're now down to collections in the USA. Okay, thank you very much. Let's see. Yeah, Smithsonian Air and Space Museum has some ephemera. These are documents, but it has, I would say, limited interest. They have some people that's a part of their responsibility, but I'd say they have limited interest, and I don't know if they're going to collect any hardware. Then, as I mentioned, a problem with Jim Dielson's collection. Private collections are disappearing because, well, who's going to take care of this stuff? It's a burden for people who survive us to maintain this stuff, and most of it is just considered junk by the people who live around us today. And so, except for places like Arne in Germany, nobody, and the Folkecenter, nobody is preserving this hardware. Next slide. And as we've seen, website repositories are unfortunately very ephemeral. Platforms change, links change, and some sites disappear altogether. For example, my site, wind-works.org, has been offline for almost 3 months. And for those of you who followed renewable energy journalists, all the work by Craig Morris in the 1990s and 2000s has been lost when that website disappeared. Next. So summary is that we need permanent funding. We need permanent locations for repositories for this hardware. And we need support from permanent institutions, whether it's the Smithsonian Institute, United States, or some other organization, or permanent collections of institutions there in Europe, Great Britain, the continent, Brazil, and elsewhere where wind energy has been developed. Thank you very much. Sorry, Koya, for the presentation. I don't know what's wrong.
No problem. That was very good. That ended in a way that actually is a perfect ending for the discussions, in the sense that you raised the question of where to next, and that many of these initiatives have been done by people from deeply within inside the industry who have a lot of knowledge in their head, who have a lot of voluntarism to do these things despite the fact of lack of resources. But really the question is how to give security to this, how to do it in a systematic way, and how to do it in a coordinated way. I think you also raise a very key question at the end, that putting something on the website is not the same as long-term digital preservation. That for long-term digital preservation, it's a very difficult process. It needs a lot of interventions. It needs both technique and software and hardware. And also it raises the question that the big expansion of wind energy from, let's say, the 1970s to the 1990s, and then again from 1990s to 2000, coincides with the very early use of computerized records. And those are some of the most at-risk records. A floppy disk from the 1980s presents many, many problems. You might not have the hardware to read it. The disk might have been corrupted. And actually a paper document from the 1700s is likely to be a much stronger, in a better chance of being preserved than a floppy disk record from the 1980s. There's a very big problem with 80s material. Similarly, old analog materials such as video cassettes and audio cassettes are now getting to the point where they urgently need to be digitized because those media corrupt. So they're actually very, very fragile, some of those materials. And I think, part of a next stage of process is to really identify what are some of the key records at risks, where are they physically, what risks they're facing, and how to deal with that. So anyway, those I think are some of the really key issues that your presentation throws up in a very good way. Now wait a second. I no longer see Mike Bergey. Are you here, Mike?
Mike's there.
Yep.
Oh,
yeah,
wait,
I'm
sorry,
there.
sorry, yeah, okay. How do you feel about doing some impromptu contribution?
Well, I'm not going to be in a position to give you a lecture, but I want to point out that I think this is a excellent exercise. I'd like to support it. I do go back to about 1974, and I'm a pack rat, so I have a lot of paper. I have plenty of storage space, so I probably have 40 or 50 bankers boxes full of old conference proceedings, sales literature.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, I was heavily involved with the American Wind Energy Association, so I've got a lot of WWEA meeting records and different things. A lot of my stuff is focused on small turbines. So I don't know whether the scope of your project includes small turbines. It didn't today, but if there's an interest, I'd be happy to help. And there are a couple of books out there. Some have been published, some are in the works. Chris Gillis has a book that he's done. He's a very good researcher. And has chased down a lot of information that, when I come across information on the industry that I didn't know, it's like finding a gold nugget for me. And Chris has dug some real gems out of the history. That book, I believe, is going to be published by the University of Oklahoma Press in 2023. It was delayed by COVID, but I have the manuscript. But that'll be a good source. So anyway, I just offer, my help if you'd like to work in the small turbine area, and I offer, the records I have on large scale wind development in the U.S. And there were, as I listened to some of the national summaries, I could think of some interesting bits that were left out that really should be should be talked about. For an example, how the Danish government used export and technical assistance in India specifically to help the Danish turbine manufacturers survive the plunge in the market in say 85 to 1990. Had they not done that, that we wouldn't have the Vestas and other. So I hope we can capture some of those nuances. I think it makes the history of our industry very interesting.
By the way, as I already pointed out, we have a Bergey, so I'm definitely interested.
And the least we should do is find some money to digitize all those records that Mike has. That's probably a gold mine of material that's not easily found on the internet, as Eric and I found in doing the research for our article, or even it's not even available digitally at all.
So, I mean, in terms of this meeting, there's obviously we haven't had any questions and answers, and we haven't had any discussion. I think in terms of questions and answers, there were too many presentations to have a sort of question and answer session. In terms of discussing next steps, I mean, we could discuss it now, or although this meeting's already been sort of going on 3 hours, I think it might be more useful that we sort of park this and that we say we would very much like to continue this discussion with you as, you know, individuals and the organizations that you're part of, that clearly there is a real wealth of historical knowledge here. And I think it's not just that people have presented about their individual countries. We're bit by bit getting a global picture and a picture of the process of change. And that's something that we have been from the beginning sort of thinking in our conceptualization of this process, that it has to be global, that the wind sector is not just a collection of national case studies. It's a global process, it's a global industry. It has a world division of labor, that's continually changing. And that really it's important to frame it that way from the beginning, which obviously raises very big challenges because, you know, first of all, the records are in particular countries and many of the record keeping institutions will be in particular countries. But at the same time, it's important that it is a global process. So I think if people don't object to it, maybe we wrap up the meeting now, and that we say in the new year, we will follow up, that Liz and Stefan and I will continue our discussions. We also hope in the new year that our article will be published with the International Council on Archives Journal, and we'd very much like to share that with you once it's out, and that we think of ways to continue this process. If that's all right, if people, unless anyone has any burning thing they would like to add into the discussion before we close. No,
can you hear
good.
me still? It's Peter Ray.
Yes.
Thank you. I had on my list of things as we're winding up to mention about small wind, and I'm particularly pleased that Mike has made the offer that he has, and I, on behalf of WWEA, and I accept the offer and say that very glad that it's been forthcoming. I was also thinking as we went through that while there were some very interesting presentations, not all of them referred to the records which may be available in their particular country. And it might be a useful follow-up from this to invite the people who made a presentation to just add something further about their records availability. I've done it for Australia, and I'll just run through it quickly, very quickly, because I'll send it in writing. But you've got the Australian Wind Energy Association, which was formed to get wind going. You've got the Renewable Energy Generators of Australia, the Clean Energy Council, the Australian Greenhouse Office, the Roundtable, which was developed to try to bring government and the industry together, the Australian Greenhouse Office, which was a very important part of the early days of wind development. Hydro Tasmania has very detailed records and would be an important source. National Health and Medical Research Council, I think, is particularly important to something which Australia seems to have had much more experience than other countries, because certainly there was work in by the people strongly opposing wind energy on health grounds. There was work done in the United States and Canada, but it was very prominent in Australia for a period of time, and that's why the National Health and Medical Research Council's work is important. But so too are some of the other areas in which the health and the social and environmental issues were argued, and ultimately what has been a defeat of those who were claiming that wind turbines were a danger to human health. And that ran very strongly in Australia for quite a long period of time, and at a parliamentary level as well as at a general public and a social and health level. We haven't included the German Wind Energy Association, which has been one of the very strong parts of the total organisation of wind in the world. And I would hope that we could invite their participation next time. We also should, I think, look at the context of wind as part of the REN Alliance, the Renewable Energy Alliance, which is made up of the International Hydropower Association, the World Wind Energy Association, the International Solar Energy Society, the World Bioenergy Association, and the International Geothermal Association. And they could all give part of the story of how important it has been in the development of wind to have the support also of the other major international renewable energy associations. And so I think that could well be a part of the next part as we go on. There's good records there. And finally, I think that we haven't mentioned the International Windship Association and the work that has been done in relation to the use of wind for reducing the pollution created by shipping transport. And that's one which is doing a very good job with support from the major shipping companies, Maersk and others, who are supporting the work that's being done, and it's making some considerable advances, I believe. So those are just some suggestions as we're winding up. The other thing I'd like to do is to just confirm that Stefan asked me in particular to apologise for the fact that he's not able to participate in this particular one, and asked me to, on behalf of the World Wind Energy Association, say how much we are indebted to you as the chair of the meeting, but also as the person who's been developing work in relation to this, and to also thank all the other participants that we've had during this, well, I was going to say evening, because in my time it's just after 2:15 in the morning. And so I think we've probably reached the stage where we can happily wind up and say we've all done our duty and made our contributions. And thank you very much for chairing the meeting. WWEA, I believe, can make its records available in a very useful way as well, because they're very considerable input from its members which are available. But what we heard tonight and what we can add to it will be tremendous. So thank you very much. And that winds up as far as WWEA participation is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying up till after 2 in the morning. That's very impressive. Liz, is there anything you would like to say before we close the meeting? All get our rests.
Yeah, just that I'm sorry that I think some of you joined the meeting sort of halfway through, so you wouldn't have heard from me, so you've probably got no idea who I am, what I'm doing here. So at some point I'll try and actually reach out to you all. But yeah, in a nutshell, I'm the director of the Mills Archive Trust in the UK, where we archive the history of milling globally, and are very interested in expanding our remit to look at electricity generation. We do already have quite a few records on electricity generation globally, and we're looking to better understand what we have and work with other organizations such as yourselves to sort of map out what else is around in the world. It's been really fascinating. Yeah, thank you very much, and I'll be in touch.
Kola, I'd just like to add something very quickly before we all ring off, and that is we need to be very nice to Paul Gipe and encourage him to share his voluminous research notes for all the books he's written, because he probably has the most robust documented history of wind turbines of all sizes. And you know, it's unfortunate that he's gotten so enamored with electric cars and is not as active in wind power as he was, but we'll always cherish the hard work that he's done. We want to capture that.
Well, thanks, Mike, and I hope to get my website back up soon. And we're going to post some more of the research that Eric and I did for our articles, so it's there. And I hope that all of you copy it to your own website, so if this happens again, at least you'll have a record of it.
Excellent. Okay, so then we will be in touch in the new year. It won't happen immediately. This process is growing at the rate it's growing, but we will certainly be in touch before too long. So thank you again for coming, and Happy New Year to you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.